All right, Mike.
Thank you for joining the Professional Grounds Management Society today for the 2021 Coast to Coast Challenge. The first stop for our virtual tour series is the Portland Japanese Garden. Please note that all participants are muted for the best sound quality. If you have any questions or concerns, please use the chat feature below as it will be monitored. Sada will also answer questions that are entered in the chat box throughout the tour and at the end of the tour. This tour is being recorded and will be released later this month with all of the tour recordings in a private Coast to Coast group in your member portal. It's my pleasure to introduce Sada Uchiyama, Chief Curator of the Portland Japanese Garden. A fourth-generation Japanese gardener from Japan, he is devoted to fostering relations between Japanese gardens in Japan and those outside of Japan. He has been involved in the development of the North American Japanese Garden Association. Sada is a registered landscape architect in Oregon with both a bachelor's and master's in landscape architecture from the University of Illinois. His representative projects include Osaka Garden, the site of the 1893 Great Columbian Exposition at Jackson Park in Chicago, the Shofuan of the Denver Botanic Gardens, and a Japanese garden at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, which, funny enough, we will see later in our tour series. Please enjoy this exclusive behind-the-scenes tour of the Portland Japanese Garden.
Hi, my name's Mike Beaulieu, and welcome to the kickoff tour for the PGMS 2021 Coast to Coast Challenge. We're here today at the beautiful Portland Japanese Garden, and I'm with the garden's Chief Curator, Sada Uchiyama. Sada, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for taking the time.
I come with a garden, so.
And what a garden it is.
Thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit, Sada, about the history of the garden and maybe your role as the Chief Curator?
So the garden dates back to 1963. So that's where just imagine that very, like 15 years after the war or something. So it was, in a way, tough time, but at the same time, the citizens of Portland are eager to rebuild relationship. So that's how the garden was born. So it started as a sort of sister cities, between Portland and Sapporo, and that's the initiation at least. And then the planning start 1963. Then actual construction is 65 and 67. We are partially open, not whole things. So yeah, we've been about close to 70 years now on this ground.
Yeah.
And so it's remarkable what a garden, a Japanese garden in our case, can do to heal the relationship.
Since the World War II.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the garden is a beautiful venue to really bring the people together.
Mm-hmm.
And garden is generous to receive all feelings, good and bad, and then sort of hold it. So it's a beautiful sort of way to bring the people, and then in our case heal the wounds.
Yeah.
So
it wasn't such a smooth road right from the start, was it? It was a little bit rough.
Right. So just so you can imagine, 1960, still everyone remembers, war just ended.
Yeah.
And so the construction, during the initial construction, 1965 to right down 70 was a tough ride. And you can imagine. But, there's, the people who are not so fond of having the garden or building the garden, but the same amount or larger number of people supporting us all along and up until today. So I think little by little, the garden, starts small, and only 1/3 of the area was open 1967, and construction continues.
So about 3 or 4 acres at the beginning.
Right,
Yeah.
at the beginning, right.
Okay.
And then not every day, probably just a half a year,
Yeah.
because there was no garden to speak of in a way.
Yeah, right, right.
It's just a little plants and here and there.
Yeah.
So that was
I have to start somewhere, right?
exactly. But
All right.
that's the part I really like to give the audience today. You won't believe how Portland Japanese garden looked like way back 1960 and 70. There was literally nothing, but the garden grew. So that's really the hope we always.
It used to be a zoo, right?
Yes, right.
So it's a site for a small zoo.
They moved to the other side of the hill, but yeah.
Okay.
But it was a beautiful site to begin with. So
Yeah.
it's one thing when you have a garden or building a garden, you cannot change is a location. So at least the location was picked right, 100%. Right.
Okay, and how about your role as Chief Curator? Just a quick synopsis on that.
Right. So I was a garden curator up until the end of the last year, 22, and so it's still just 3-4 months in this role. So I'm trying to figure things out. But basically now we have very capable garden curator. Hugo Tori is in place, and he's busy today up there.
Okay.
So really my role right now, the first and foremost, is to make a transition smooth. So we took this year 2021 is a year for transition. Basically,
Okay.
just it's I've been here for now 13 years, so there's a lot I've been carrying.
How many years?
13 years.
13 years.
Right.
Okay.
So I have to unload that and then provide him enough information and ideas so he can just carry that.
Yeah. So your role now is more of a managerial or supervisory position? Or?
Still, I'm more on the garden side to make sure that this again transition is my priority role. But next year on, most likely we have a big plan. I can talk later.
Okay.
This is still secret. I can talk up there.
All right.
So that big project is upcoming, and that's something on my portfolio to manage. So that's a very big job.
Yeah.
But
all right.
Yes. In the meantime, I'm a senior version of Garden Curator for time being right now. Right.
Okay. All right. Well, let's dive right in, should we?
Sure.
The garden is located on 12 acres of a steep, heavily forested ravine just west of downtown Portland. With a vertical drop of about 400 feet between the low and high points of the property, stormwater management is a serious challenge for this designated sensitive area. While we work our way up the hill, Sada will talk about some of the challenges that the garden faces in complying with stormwater code requirements while maintaining the aesthetic integrity of the grounds. Our tour begins at the Welcome Center, passing through the antique gate as we work our way up to the Cultural Village courtyard. From there, we pass through the Nezu Gate, arriving at the main garden area, which is generally referred to as the Historic Gardens. Our first stop will be at the incredible and diverse beauty of the Flat Garden. Down the path we'll go, continuing beneath a gorgeous wisteria arbor, through the strolling pond garden, and stopping at the jaw-dropping Heavenly Falls. We'll wrap up the Historic Gardens visit with stops at the Natural Garden and the stone and sand garden. And then finally, we'll close out the tour at the formidable castle wall located in the cultural village.
The actual construction took almost 26 years, up until 1990. So you see the garden today is actually, that took 27 years to build the whole thing.
Wow.
Right. So this is the important point too. We just a commitment, the length,
Yeah.
keep on moving, and it's a long term investment of course, you know, the money and manpower, but
Yeah.
emotional.
Do you find that projects and remodels, if you will, tend to take a little longer than you anticipate? I mean, I know I do. They always take longer than you think, and
Never
you want
get
them to
short.
take X number of days,
Right.
and they take X times 10.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Well, I think we just finished the biggest, you know, so far, the project. This is the expansion. This is brand new, opened 2017 spring. So we are just exactly almost 4 years since we reopened.
Okay.
So this new addition took good year and a half to build. So we didn't have anything here but the parking. So that was what's before.
Yeah.
So this water feature with the new buildings, which has basically primary the ticketing function and welcoming, we call welcoming center here. But the one thing I need to just note is this is outside of the garden. The fence is right there. So basically the part of our expansion and this time is we basically share this feature with the public. And you pay the entry fees right there. So this is actually outside of
this
Japanese
is
garden.
kind of shared by the city of Portland.
Right. This everyone welcome. So this is our one way to basically say thank you, and we like to share with everyone, not just the visitors.
Okay.
So people can hang around in the summertime. It's a beautiful spot.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. All right. Shall we move up?
Sure.
Okay.
This is what technical term is water quality facilities. Used to be, you know, basically those what's the treating the water with bioswale. And so this is actually looks like a Japanese sort of dry creek, but this is actually functioning, engineered, actually the water quality facility.
So there used to be a bioswale?
No, this is.
Oh, this serves as a bioswale.
Yes,
I got
doesn't
you.
look like,
Okay.
but that's the point. So
that's the most beautiful bioswale I've ever seen in my life.
Right. So that's why it's important. Well, this what we call West Hill. It's basically the location within the metropolitan Portland areas. This is by far the most difficult place as far as building anything, and that means this is protected areas. We are under triple zoning, environmental zone, not just one, triple. So we every bit of improvement or change, digging and placing anything, is a big deal in this whole hill. So
because you're on a hillside,
right,
and there's water
and
water
there's
management that you have to
fault
consider.
zone, earthquake concern, and things like that. So we have every bit of that.
Yeah.
So in order to build that structures up above, it's we have to basically capture all rainwater. And the reason being in this Portland, standard is you have to send the water down to the ground right away. But this is one exception because there is a fault zone running. That slope is actually the fault rubbing. So sending the water in this crack, they're afraid, engineers are afraid that lubricates and aggravates basically otherwise a fairly stable condition. So because of that, we have to capture every bit of rainwater falls there.
Pretty sensitive area.
Right. So once you capture the water, that means you have to treat. So, but we are a Japanese garden, we cannot put the standard bioswale with a bunch of cattails and things like that. So this is a sort of the hybrid of the Japanese dry gardens and this water quality facilities.
Yeah.
So this is engineered structures that can handle 300 gallons per minute. That's the design volume. And so you don't see any water right now, but on rainy season in the wintertime, this creek is running. Right.
So it's constantly filling up down there and then distributing it
That's correct.
beyond.
And we're in the very top of the very stringent sort of neighborhood, very old neighborhood. So the system, the stormwater system is very old and small. So practically we are asked not to discharge any if possible.
You want to keep the neighbors happy, right?
Right. Also their system, we don't want to overload their system. So so this is very intricate, starting from up above. There's a series of creek, and then that's a conveyance. Also, there's some treatment is happening here.
Okay.
Right. So,
Yeah, I think
it's a gorgeous area.
yeah, absolutely.
So the second stop, I have to stop here because this is really the main entrance of the garden. And so really officially Portland Japanese Garden begins here. Officially right,
beginning
right,
here.
right.
Okay.
So this is a sort of entrance garden we call. And this is function is to really welcoming and safely move the visitors.
So it's kind of a buffer zone
That's
between
correct.
the real garden and
Right, that's correct. And so this gate was originated way back in 1967, I believe. It was a gift from Japan. So, but the gate itself is already 200 some years old.
wow.
So any structures in sort of traditional Japanese architecture do not have a foundation, therefore portable.
Oh.
So Japanese buildings are meant to be portable. So for instance, the capital moved from Kyoto to Tokyo, thousands of houses are actually moved.
So was this assembled
This was
in Japan?
Was in Japan.
Shipped over and then reassembled
That's
here?
correct.
Wow.
Right. So that's you have heard many probably Japanese architecture they don't use the nails and things.
Yeah.
Right. So that's
They're
the part of the
fastener-free.
reason, right? So you can take them apart.
Yeah.
Right. Then reassemble. So anyway, this is old gate, so we call antique gate. And this is really the beginning of the old part of the garden we will be strolling through. And this portion is really, again, zoning changes almost each sort of increment. Here is we didn't really touch anything during this expansion of the 2015 to 17, because this is totally triple overlay zone. We cannot touch. All the structures are grandfathered in because it's older than the zoning code. But the currently, this is the most protected probably zoning areas in Portland.
So you definitely want to keep this well maintained.
So we do repair anyway. So
all right.
Right. So
shall we roll?
Sure. One of those, little more zigzag path to really idea is to prepare the visitors. So this is a very top of this water quality facility. So this is indeed is actually conveyance. Looks like a dry creek, but the rain season this will be full of water. So all rainfalls basically come down on the roof, and the plaza you will see soon comes. There's a 10-inch pipe right behind that big rocks, and two 6-inch pipe up above, and the two 6-inch pipe is from this creek. Okay. So it's a quite bit, volume water, and then carried, and then because of this is a triple overlay zone. We
Mhm.
cannot do anything on the ground. So it's actually 8 feet in the ground.
Oh, no
Two
kidding.
inch pipe is basically running,
Wow.
and then daylight
Yeah.
down below.
So this carries all the roof water as well as the hard surface
Right, that's
water up
correct.
there?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Then
Gotcha.
we treat down there
Uh-huh.
as they keep on going. Then ultimately we have a 47,000 gallon tank under the parking. That's entire parking is almost tank, So
Uh,
that's where we
47,000 gallons? Wow. That's huge.
right.
Yeah.
And then just the discharge small amount
Mhm.
in the non-rainy season. So we
Okay.
try to hold most of the water, in the rainy season as
Yeah.
much, and then discharge.
And can you reuse that?
Well, that was the idea, but Portland we have more rain than more water than we need.
Oh,
So
yeah. Okay.
reusing. Ideally, yes, that's a good idea, but the cost wise doesn't quite
Doesn't work.
justify it. Right. Right.
Maybe-
Otherwise, yeah, absolutely. The
Maybe we
irrigation.
could ship it over to Central Oregon where we really need the water.
Right, we can send it.
Yeah.
So anyway, here is a new portion back. So we walked through the old portion, and this bridge basically takes you to this 2017 expansion that we built. So we just goes up, and then there's a big plaza.
Okay. Shall we head up?
Sure.
Okay.
So here is the Portland Japanese garden. I mean, old part consists of 5 different styles. So this is the largest and the main and the most formal of all 5 flat garden. Just the basically flat garden consists of the expand of the gravel and then some backdrop vegetation. In our case, primarily displaying the pine trees, and this is a mix of the Japanese black pine and native shore pine. The short needles are shore pines, but the both 2 needle pines, so it takes a very similar maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the back of your is lace leaf, big lace leaf maple.
Yeah.
Right. So it's needs a little bit of haircut, which we're going to. We just finished the pine pruning, and so you can see no candles on the pine trees.
Ah.
Typically, this is the time of the year.
So that's how you control the growth pattern?
That's correct. So it's a busy time. We just finished the pine kindling. That takes the whole the garden department.
And that same technique is used in bonsai plants too, right?
Very similar, but the bonsai has a much tighter control. They candle probably sometimes 2-3 times
Per season.
per season.
Wow.
Right, depending on where you're at.
Yeah.
And Portland, I have heard as many as 3 times.
Yeah.
Right. But we do once. Sometimes actually, depending on the tree, we do twice. And so the flat garden reed idea is you can see there's no. By the way, we don't have many fences to divide. So from one garden to the next garden is just the pathways, and before you know, you are into the next garden. So flat garden is the most sort of formal and contained, I would say, the garden. So the backdrop, you can see those dogwoods and Japanese maple. That's really the sort of extent of this garden. And the flat garden is almost always associated with or attached to the building. So this pavilion was built in 1980, and the dedication day exactly, that's where Monson Heron exploded.
Oh, that's
so
right.
Everyone remember that day.
Wow.
Everyone knows what's the dedication day of this building.
So Sada, this is what I was talking about earlier.
Mhm.
This is, you have in the background here,
Yes.
you have the quintessential native Pacific Northwest forest. You got Doug fir, cedar, um, a couple
We
big
have
leaf
hemlock and
maple,
ground forest. Yeah.
and so that's the backdrop. Then in the foreground, you got all this color and texture and diversity and of the Japanese garden, and it just, to me, this is my favorite spot in the whole garden, because I think it just kind of sums up the whole idea of blending the Japanese garden in with its surroundings.
Right. Also, really, this is a microcosm. You know, all of a sudden
A
we come up,
microcosm,
and
yeah.
all of a sudden you are in a different world. I mean, if I take a pictures and send to anyone, a friend in Japan, they all believe if I say I'm in Kyoto right under this, they don't think I'm in Portland. So,
Oh.
but the only thing is, though, all Japanese, a friend of mine and colleagues in the garden business, it's a very, they said, the interesting but the beautiful mix of the Pacific Northwest and Japanese elements, because
It's
in
right
Japan
here.
you don't have a Japanese garden in this setting at
Oh,
all.
yeah, yeah.
So it's kind of someone coming from Japan, it's kind of strange, because if you are at the eye level, it's perfect Japanese garden. But the minute you are looking up, all of a sudden you
Yeah.
are Pacific Northwest. So by the way, that stone lantern, probably you don't believe it's actually solid 6 foot. Doesn't look like it.
No, it doesn't.
Right.
I would say it's probably 4.5 foot.
Right. That's what this white gravel do. They kind of fool your eyes
Oh, no kidding.
as far as perception of the distance.
Huh.
So without these features in the middle, you totally lose the sense of distance. So this is somehow gives you some sort of sense of distance with this. But if this is all gravel all the way, and you don't even know this is flat or even vertical. So that's how the garden is actually sort of utilizing how we sense the distance.
So let's talk just for a minute about the maintenance of this, because I know that's what we're all about. But I get carried away with the beauty and the aesthetics of it, but I forget there's maintenance involved too.
Sure.
So how do you how often do you schedule a crew? How many do you have, and what special tools do they have and techniques do they have in this area?
So currently, as you know, this COVID situation, we downsized, and we are rebuilding the garden crews back to where we are.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 6 of us right now, and used to be 8, and basically the optimum is 10 of us. Taking care of this is old garden is 5.5 acres. The new portion is 4 acres, so roughly 9.5 acre landscaped, and so one gardener per acre.
And that's
roughly
from basically the entry gate down below up to the cultural village.
Right.
Yeah.
So the maintenance of this garden is this is again, it's all we have the same issue of how people, visitors, treat the garden. So depending on if the kids run into 10 times, then we have to clear. But
They try to build a sandcastle.
Right. So actually, it's hard to believe, but we don't do that often of the raking.
Yeah.
It's very people are very respectful.
Yeah.
And so keep also. By the way, this is a granite. This gravel came from Japan. This is the original.
Oh, it is.
Yes.
Wow.
Back in 1970, you can ship anything, right?
Yeah.
In a container.
Yeah. Not anymore.
Right. This one actually came from Kyoto. Actually, right. So this is the authentic, what we call Shirakawa, the gravel.
All right. Well, shall we move on?
Sure. Wow. Now it's back to the blue.
Down there.
So you see now we are moving from one garden to the next, but it really doesn't tell you or no sign or anything. You just enjoy this as pretty much a part of the garden.
Right.
Also, another things I want you to note is we have very little signs.
Yes,
Right.
I have noticed that.
Right.
And I have not seen any, other than the gentleman back there, but I have not seen any tools or anything lying around.
So that's the same even during the visitors are here, because we try to have them really immerse themselves and
Yeah.
talking to the trees, not themselves.
Yeah.
So the quietness is important for us.
Yeah.
So we try to pretty much quiet all signage and everything else less, so people can really enjoy.
So the pathways we're taking are actually, they're not a designated garden, but they're just as engaging, I think, as the gardens themselves.
Yeah,
That's not like you're walking through kind of a dead zone and then you get down to the garden and pizzazz. It's really, really beautiful along the way.
My biggest the praise to the garden designer, Professor Tono, is the connection of this garden.
Mhm.
Each garden, of course, are wonderful, but how that move the people from one garden to the next.
Yeah.
So that's where it's beautifully done.
Yep.
Right. So here is the wisteria in season. The right side one, you can see how old, and this is a new one we just replaced a few years ago.
Okay.
So it started blooming.
Yeah.
And this has been pretty much probably right on from the 1970. So it's really old.
I wanted to ask you for your thoughts on how impactful the Japanese culture has been in the design planning and even the maintenance of the gardens. And I was looking on your website, a couple things caught my eye, a couple quotes. So I'll read them to you.
Okay.
You can kind of expand on them
Sure.
if you want. But I gotta read them because I didn't memorize them. So one quote is, "In Japanese gardens, everything is intentional." And then the other quote is, "Japanese gardens are meant to evoke quiet reflection rather than strong emotions."
So I think the starting with the second point is really just this is really the sort of the passive, recreation, the time people spend. And as I said before, many people, like someone lost their loved ones, and they come to the garden. Someone have a new baby, festivities, they come here. So the people bring all kinds of emotions. So the garden doesn't need to show off anything or tell them anything, but just being the more or less the sort of container of their
the vehicle
emotions.
for
Exactly.
So it runs the gamut from everything from personal reflection to a celebration, like you
Absolutely.
say.
Any emotion. So that's I think the most important aspect. So we try to provide the best and the calmest and gentlest possible environment. So that is the garden is about.
Yeah.
So and grouping of trees and the plants and stones that gives them a sort of something to reflect on or contemplate on, and then sort of unloading the emotions, and garden sort of hold it. So that's right.
So the intentional aspect of it is kind of your plant selections, your arrangements, your landscape layout. That's all kind of reflecting on what you're trying to provide to garden visitors.
So you can see of course, right now is azalea is in season. So in most cases, oftentimes we talk about that there's not many flowers in Japanese garden. Well, we do, but we do in that season. We don't necessarily display. We don't necessarily bring out of season place. So you will see the season by way of azaleas. Now it's May.
Yeah.
Right. So the wisterias. So May to June, and very soon you will see the iris is coming, which is June, July. So we do have flowers, but in a way that following the natural cycle.
Yeah. So you're not intentionally trying to plant this group of flowers here that blooms in May, and then this group that blooms in June, and this group that blooms in July.
Yeah.
Your thinking is,
I think it's just
different.
it's a different way of providing, what we call gardens. Garden can be all different way. So, in my definition of the sort of Japanese garden and say Western style garden is for instance, English garden is really the garden of seasons,
yeah,
right? Basically, it's the seasonal cycle. So
Yeah.
when you see the spring flowers, you expect what's next summer is coming.
Mhm.
So we all live in this seasonal, year cycle, four
Mhm.
season, which is important.
Yeah.
So the flower garden, I would say, is a reminder of the season
Mhm.
and the cycle of the year.
Mhm.
Japanese gardens, the time span is much longer.
Mhm.
So we are the garden of rocks.
Mhm.
So what that means is what we provide is this stabilities and changed environment.
Mhm.
So also we need, because we live in a much longer geological time, and we all born and die.
Yeah.
So Japanese garden provide that time span experience.
Yeah.
So it looks like nothing changed, but for instance, rocks will over million years crumble down to the sand and dust goes away.
Yeah.
So still
Okay.
it's
Ever evolving.
right, but a little longer
Yeah.
time. So
Yeah. I love this velvety ground cover too.
right, same thing. Like we just explore some pond gardens and creek connect to the lower
Mhm.
and the main pond.
And
So
what supplies the water for this?
this one is actually recirculating.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we are probably amending probably just the 2-3 gallons a minute because of the evaporation
Yeah.
and things like that.
Right. Right.
So there's no fish here
Yeah.
because the pond is too shallow.
Okay.
Down there is much deeper, so they can winter because we don't necessarily take the koi fish out during winter.
So they more or less hibernate
That's correct.
as
Right.
much
So
as fish hibernate.
they're just a backup, and this is the most vulnerable time because the water temperatures goes up, and all kinds of microbe becomes active and can infect the fish. Is oftentimes, I get the question, how many plants you have, how many species,
Yeah.
right? And we're garden, but we are not the botanical garden in the way that we collect the plants or display. But
Yeah.
what we are doing is showing the sort of what each species can do
Mhm.
as opposed to how many species. So probably you noticed by now we don't have many actually species here, not many kinds.
Not a huge variety.
Right.
Right.
So
and I'm guessing you don't keep an inventory of your plants, do you? Or
we do.
oh, you do?
Yeah,
Okay.
but as I said, for instance, like you see the big dog firs and cedars and hemlocks, and probably you can take a look at that hemlock hedge of about 4 feet tall.
Oh, yeah.
Is the same age as the most of these trees.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
So again, depending on how we maintain, how we prune, it can be hedge or it can be 3-foot diameter tree.
Again,
so right,
it's intentional.
Right.
So there you don't want
we are trying
large
to just like the movement of eating the whole instead of only the fillet and throw everything away. But we try to show what each species can do, can become. So what we call like a tree species, sometimes you see as a shrub here. So just a good example is that's a hedge. So I think each tree, each species has a potential. And then we are trying to sort of display what they can become.
Yeah.
Right.
That's great.
This is designed and approved ADA accessible route. So when we're talking about the ADA, I'm sure many public garden is always concerned about the accessibility. So there's a set rules, for instance, textures and the width and all those things. I work with the city for quite some time to represent this this is perfectly meeting the code. Right. So in other words, even the ADA access doesn't need to be plain concrete, 4.5 feet high. They just came out of the hibernation.
Uh-huh.
And as we monitor the water temperature and then how active they are, and then we just keep feeding. So in the height of summer, we feed, I believe, 4 times or 5, depending on how long the day.
Yeah.
Right. So
wow.
So these are somewhere probably now 4, 5 years old to up to probably, I don't know, 14, 15 years old.
Uh-huh.
Right.
And koi is native to Japan.
That's correct. But these have been, going through the hybrid after hybrid. So right, started. But what I know is I think orange and the red is old color.
Mm-hmm.
Those shiny colors and yellows are relatively new hybrid.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The newer models.
So you can see the black ones. So that's how it started. So back then, sometimes, like probably 300 some years ago, someone found a little tint of the orange in the black.
Yeah.
So that's how they just kept going. So in the black, there's, I believe, native 2 colors already built in.
Mm-hmm.
So one of which is the orange color, right? So these guys are probably, 40, 50 generations.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's this is obviously the artificial, actually, water recirculating, and we are probably running about 250, 300 gallons per minute. So that's the volume of water running. So there's a pump house basically behind me, and there's five horsepower running.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them dedicated this, and 3 are dedicated for the filtration.
Okay.
And one pump is sending the water back to the upper pond.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the.
Okay. So this, I mean, I know it's not a natural waterfall, but man, I mean, it looks just like it's been there for 1,000 years. How do you guys do that? I mean, what's going through your head when you're trying to design that? And
well, I think it's really the Japanese garden started from the observation of the nature. Basically, we learn all this from what's out there.
Yeah.
So not necessarily initially, of course it's copying, try to copy what's out there.
Yeah.
But over time you learn sort of, in a way, some system. Like for instance, there's a 2 type of rocks. The one rocks come out of the mountain. So this is sort of mimicking the waterfall deep in the mountain, right? High, almost vertical. So in that is a rock is coming from above the cliff, top or down, and water pushing. So rock setting in deep mountains, the rocks looks much more dynamic because it's in motion. So that's why standing and this way, that way.
Yeah.
The other way you find the rocks is coming out of the ground by erosion, by rainwater or river streams. They are much more gentle and they are grounded. So when we are building the waterfall in the sort of lower elevation, we set the rocks accordingly. So there's a good reason, just if you observe the natures and the natural landscape will tell you what's the deep mountain rocks look like.
Mm-hmm.
And then midstreams, lower streams, then the rocks are round already.
Yeah.
So if I put the round border here, it's out of place. Obvious, right? Even the non-designer's eye, because we all know round rocks draw way down.
Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah.
relatively straightforward actually, and utilizing what's out there.
So the moral of the story is, let nature be your teacher.
Yes,
I mean, you
absolutely.
can learn a lot from it.
Still,
You know.
yeah, observation and learning. So this is, you can see all, it's namesake, natural looking.
Yeah.
It's very different from the up there flat garden,
Yeah.
which is a much more formal.
Mm-hmm.
The shrubs are shared as opposed to looks natural.
Yeah.
But this is, in a way, the most, I won't say difficult, but requires the experience of pruning. We are pruning. We have to prune in such a way that it doesn't look like pruning.
Right.
Right.
That's
Right.
much harder to do than. Now on your crew, so you have about 6 on your crew,
Right.
give or take. Okay. So of them, do you have some that are more versed in pruning,
Sure,
and
sure.
you focus their tasks on this areas like this?
Right now it's because again we went through the one phase of the change, because the long-term serve gardeners left for good, becomes independent.
Mm-hmm.
Or for instance, one of them now is the curator of Chinese garden. Justin is sort of my student.
Yeah.
Or he used to work here.
Uh-huh.
And others are Leach Botanic Garden head gardener.
Okay.
So they grow, they learn,
they
and
hone
they
their skills
graduate
here and
right.
learn everything they need to learn.
So we have a new group of gardeners right now, and sort of half and half. So they are still under training. You saw the gardeners pruning. And so this one is usually the head gardener, or now is the garden curator. He leads the pruning, or he himself do. And same way, something a little more involved. Actually, the garden curator he's actually all day Friday dedicated to be on site working with the gardeners as a part of the training. So you can see all looks like plants are not pruned, but we do. As I said, it's not easy to prune the trees. Doesn't look like pruned.
I was going to say you could have fooled me. I mean, they look,
but
they look perfect.
So my description of how to do is basically you have to prune a Japanese maple in a Japanese maple way. So in other words, you need to know what unique about each tree, branching patterns and growth patterns. So you are pruning to the true of the whatever you're pruning to. So oftentimes I see that someone prune the Japanese maple look like a dogwood. That's wrong. So it's kind of funny though that it's actually it's very true. You find many trees pruned that way in a wrong.
So that really comes with experience, and a good teacher, and just having a natural eye for what looks good and what looks consistent with the way the tree is growing.
Right, and also the observation.
Yeah.
So there's the it's every day is just you're learning.
Yeah. Now, what garden are we approaching here, Sada?
This is sand and stone.
Sand and stone.
Dry garden.
No.
Right. So this is a byproduct of from the stone company making the basically dimension stone, and what they were left they don't want to throw, so they just basically crushed and then And
So by crushing it, they get the consistency that you see in
right,
here.
but
Okay.
the hindsight is it's not available consistently because when they choose, they produce when they
Yeah, yeah. You're kind of
right,
stuck to their schedule.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a tea garden, and tea garden. This one has a three subsection: the inner garden, and the middle and outer garden.
Okay.
So tea garden by definition is the passage, not the garden, the path to the tea house.
Ah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So when someone designing the tea garden, in order to make a garden qualified as a tea garden, has a two component, just two.
Has two what?
Two elements. Then you can call a tea garden.
Oh.
Right.
So that's very traditional.
Right. So
Japanese.
obviously one is a path.
Yeah.
Right. The walk.
Okay.
And the other one is a water to basically purify your body and hands to go into the tea house to receive the bowl of tea. Right. So as I said, our training center, it's every bit of this facility is a teaching tool, and the biggest one is obviously this one. This is a dry stack, no concrete or anything. This is what we call castle wall. It's known since around the mid 17th century in Japan. In particular, basically, traditionally the castle is built on top of this. So this is the foundation of the castle. So so when I said that teaching tool, it's living teaching tool. So we brought actually craft people from Japan, and then they will stay with us. They becomes an instructor as well. So it's just we're part of our mission is trying to bring the Japanese culture to make it alive. Meaning, it's if students want to build this, they can learn how to do. So it's not just an artifact in the museum in a way, but the actual. You can see the real example. We can teach how to build and just to keep the tradition not only within Japan but outside as well. So there's actually at least two more locations in the United States already built since this wall.
Oh.
Right.
So did you use a crane to lower the larger boulders into place? How did
the top half? Yes.
The top half.
Right. The bottom half is whenever we can reach like up to 6 feet is basically the excavator. That's can do lifting and placing.
Wow.
Whereas crane is only just a placement.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But once we get the 6 foot above our height, we have to build a scaffolding. That's slow us down maybe 1/3 of the productivity, and the stone is coming now, not from behind, but with crane. That slow us down as well.
I'm getting a sore back just thinking about this. Man.
But this was about 180, just under 180 feet long. The tallest one is, there's one more course in the ground. So the tallest one is 21 and 18 and 15 feet. So that's that.
Yeah.
And it was 2.5 months of construction, which is pretty good job.
2.5 months total?
Yes.
That's really good.
So I think
Wow.
we can make some money.
Man.
Right. But anyway, the part of the message I want to actually send with this one is really maybe some techniques or design was born in one culture, but they don't need to stay there. If it's a good one, should go out. So my thinking always that Japanese reinvented and redefined, and then they should share, right? So that's our mission here, to not just again, it's not artifact, but it's a real stone wall, real buildings, and all those things, so that people can enjoy and then you can connect. And then just it happened to be from Japan, but the bottom line is the good stuff, something good should be shared, and that's really we're doing.
Well, Sada, you've certainly shared a lot of good with us today here. So we're going to wrap it up. And thank you so much. This has been, I could go on for another 3 hours, but I know I get in trouble.
In different seasons, right? Yes.
But thank you very much.
Sure.
Really appreciate it. And to all our members and viewers, if you get a chance, Portland, Oregon, ever come to Portland, Oregon, come by the Portland Japanese Garden. You will not regret it. It's just spectacular. So thank you again,
Sure.
sir.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Take care. Bye.
Actually, I want to be a travel, food writer.
Oh,
I love cooking.
yeah.
Right? On broke the little branch. So I remember that much. So
You need to go to Sada's office right now.
But that's turkey grits and chicken grits. They feed the birds with for digestion. So that's perfect.
So if you really get desperate someday,
right.
you go out and buy yourself some chicken grits.
Exactly.
And throw them in there, right?
Right. And don't tell your.
Hello. Thank you so much, Mike and Sada. That was incredible. Guys, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. I know we had a few that came through that were directed at us. So Sada, if you just wouldn't mind recapping some of the tools that you guys use. I think there's a question specifically regarding what you guys use to rake the gravel.
Well, and actually it's a wooden, it's probably 16, 17 pound. It's pretty heavy wooden rake. I inherited from probably previous generation, goes back to a good 15, 20 years. So it's a wooden, the why it's heavy. Just imagine that the rake, let's see the 1/4 inch, roughly the size gravel, and 1 3/4, 2 inch deep. It takes so much weight to actually dig in. So if you don't have a weight on your rake, you have to really push hard to make an impression on the gravel. So that's one thing. But if it's too heavy, you ended up gathering the gravel. So there's a magic sort of, not the size, but it's more to do with the weight. And it just, let's say roughly, 3 inch wide, 3 inch thick, and about 2 feet wide, and 12 inch, and with a zigzag teeth. So, but that's came to me after so many years of trial and errors, the weight. So I think depending on your type of gravel and size and thickness, you have to sort of test in different weight, but the weight is a key. Otherwise, it's very hard, about say 1,000 square foot to draw the patterns. That takes actually lots of energy. But if you have a right weight and the wooden rake, that will make your job a lot easier. So if you are interested in, I can send you a picture So send me email. So you'll see what kind of rake we use. Right.
I'd be happy to
Sada,
post that video.
I was just curious, Sada, do the guys working the rakes, do they have to wear special footwear of some kind so they don't impact as they're walking away?
Right,
Or how,
right. They
is it
need to
like
learn.
breaking out a sand trap as you get out of there?
What they learn to fly over. No, I'm kidding. It's amazing. This is again is a physics. If you have a right mix of gravel and has an impression up and down, it can support actually human weight. Surprisingly, let's see, our footprint is 3" by the 10". So I don't know how many pounds per square inch, but if you walk gently up and down, not this way, then actually it's already raked, and the gravel actually can support your weight. It's hard to believe that they can be pretty actually stable. Otherwise, you can imagine that impact of raindrop is much more than human weight over the gravel. So that's a key. So in order to keep the shape of the gravel up and down and not destroyed by the raindrops. So that's again, the mix. So it's not just a 1/4 inch. There is all the way to, I would say, 1/16 of inch, as big as a 1/2 inch. So it's a mix. So when you rake the mixed gravel, they actually build the structure stable enough, and then actually can support our weight. So yeah, those are the things actually. Once you stand on the gravel, you will understand what I'm talking about.
I have to try that next time I'm out there.
Sure. We have actually the workshop too. So the raking workshop.
Learning to rake?
Very demanding, sort of, it will sell in probably 20 minutes, because this is the only time you can actually get into the garden. Otherwise, the garden is totally off limit. So that's the only opportunities we provide for the members.
Sada, if you don't mind, one of the questions came through. What is your annual operating budget?
So the garden, it's because we are not just the maintenance department. We have a development, marketing, all those typical botanic garden organizational structures. So as a Portland Japanese garden as a whole, again, this is a COVID, before COVID, and now we are rebuilding back, is I believe right around 13-14 million a year. And the garden department, probably about 15% of that is for the garden department. And I mentioned to Mike that we try to, our revenue is basically 3 sources: the admission and the membership. We have over actually 15,000 members. So it's a very big, and so membership and admission combined, we should, and almost we must, as our sort of tradition, we stay operational with admission and membership fee, as opposed to tapping into the donation. So donation is typically used for the repairs and improvements that can wait, and it's less operational expenses. So from the charter, the board, way back 1970, so they basically kept this tradition. We operate within our means, is basically membership and admission, which is very remarkable. And then the donation on top for the capital project and other necessary repairs and improvements.
Few more questions for you. You mentioned treating your water that is collected as part of stormwater management practices. How specifically is the water treated?
It's basically just a typical, the structure basically going through the vegetation and the soil. So, and I'm sure in your areas, there's a standard, the water quality trough or basically structures. So basically it's a big pond and layered soil, about 2.5 feet with the vegetation on top. And basically water percolates slowly through. And then there's basically the perforated pipe underneath. That's basically collect the seeped the water through. So the key is it's a volume is one thing, but we are trying to actually keep the water on site as long as we are able. So therefore the water goes, meandering this, stay pond here, and then creek and pond. So normally from this rainfall here on top of our hill and run down probably within 20 minutes, basically just traveling. So if we can make that one 3 times longer or 4 times, that basically reduce the impact on the sewer system, because the water we are holding as much and then gradually release. So even the same amount of water we release, but over longer period of time. So that's really the part of the contribution we are doing. And it's a challenge. It's a very steep, lots of elevation. So water like to travel fast. So we have to sort of slow it down.
How many staff or how many people are on your staff team?
So right now, the gardeners, I think we are up to 7, including the garden curators. And occasionally, depending on like a busy season, I'll actually put myself in to the, for instance, like a pine candling, and fall season. Fall is a busy season, but the current, and we are actually building back to 10 gardeners, but right now we are 7, and it's a little tight. So there's some areas we just let go for 6 months instead of 2 months. So we are trying to sort of handle, I'm sure, all same as in your garden as well. But I think so far we are okay.
Is there symbolism in the design of the garden and how it is used?
Symbols.
Is there, symbolism in the design of the garden and how it is used?
Right. In actually at the Portland Japanese garden, we tried to stay away too much of the symbolisms and stories behind. But just like any garden, so we just happen to be a Japanese garden, but some are English gardens or Italian or French. So I think the bottom line is the garden has to be beautiful. That's it, no matter what. Even the rich in symbolism, but the garden doesn't look pretty, then sort of defeat the purpose. So we take very seriously about the condition of the plants and garden, and the beautiful things, whether it's a garden or a painting, it doesn't matter. It moves people's heart. So symbolism is one thing, but the symbolism alone doesn't justify the quality of the garden. So we start with the quality of the garden, then happen to have some symbolism or story behind. So that's how we sort of define our garden.
What is your favorite plant or tree in the garden?
Favorite plant? You mean the plant? I mean trees here.
Yeah, anything in the garden.
Well, again, it's interesting, as Mike noticed, that we are in the Northwest forest, cedars and the ground firs and Douglas firs. So we cannot escape from that because that's we're surrounded by. So we try to as much utilize the native, and of course there's a unique trees and plants for Japanese gardening, but we are not necessarily married to the certain set of plants that originates from the Japanese garden in Japan, but using the natives and then the plants that can grow well in Northwest and under this climate. So surprisingly, we don't have many species actually. And the trees, the woodies, probably we have no more than 70, if any. Right, so it's relatively speaking, relative to the typical botanic garden, we have very few species, but because they do well here. And again, in addition to that, I'd like to just add one more thing is we are not botanic garden, we're Japanese garden. We are not necessarily proud of because of how many species we have. Because a common question is how many plants or how many species do we have? That's a number one common question. And my answer is we don't have many, but what we are striving for is showcasing what one species can do. For instance, like a hemlock, you probably, some maybe catch, there's a 4-foot high hemlock hedge all around the tea garden. That is the same age as 120 feet tall hemlock next to it. So depending on how you maintain, how you prune, and hemlock can be this size trees or 4-foot nice hedge. So we try to showcase what each species can become and can do. So that's actually our main goal as opposed to how many species we have. Just like this idea of eating food in a holistic way. So if you have a fish, not just a fillet, you try to eat them all. So same way, we respect each species and what it is and try to showcase the beauty and the functionality of each species.
We have a few more questions. Are any plans for expansion of the garden?
Yes, actually, Mike, sorry, I forgot to mention, we have what we call Japan Institute actually will be launched, start year 2022, next year. So what it is we are a Japanese garden, but we do lots of programs, exhibitions and the cultural festivals and all those things, actually over probably a couple of hundred or more. So we decided to basically put all these activities as opposed to just being a garden to receive the guest. And other half is we are very active in terms of all kinds of program and exhibitions and our events, and actually throughout outside of the United States, because we work with, for instance, Kew Garden in England for events. And we have some sister gardens in China and other places. So just the name Portland Japanese Garden doesn't really encompasses all our activities. So we decided to basically give a name and structure to our activities as opposed to the garden. So garden remains as a Portland Japanese Garden. But this Japan Institute is under Portland Japanese Garden umbrella. It's a new, not necessarily new, but well-defined organization that's focused on the cultural and art and the peace-related activities. So that's actually will start next year. So we have a new campus for that.
That's incredible.
So that's a big project I mentioned about before my retirement.
Last two questions. Did I just miss them? This is a question from a member. Did I just miss them, or were there no Japanese cherry blossom trees?
Yes, we do have quite few cherry trees, but As you know, there's probably close to 800 varieties and hybrids of the cherry trees. But as far as the Japanese native cherries, only 4 species. And then there's hundreds of hybrids and varieties from that. So we try to actually stick to species as opposed to the varieties. So we have only pretty much one Yoshino, that's basically species common in Japan. And so we have at least probably 50 or more cherry trees here, but 90% is just the one species, Yoshino. The reason being Yoshino as native Japanese flowers and the beloved, the favorite of Japanese. Reason being it blooms and gone within a week. So we have a cherry trees, less to do with displaying the beautiful flowers, but they give you a very clear sense of beginning of the spring. So that's the reason we have a cherry trees. So it blooms, and even today, and Japanese, the weather forecast actually officially depends on the cherry blossom to declare the spring. So the cherry flowers is everything to do with expectation and what's coming in spring. So we don't want to see that cherry trees comes flowers, this week, and the next ones comes next week, and kind of on and off and hanging in too long. So Yoshino gives us an exact almost 1 week blooms, and if you comes the 9th day, they're gone. So really, the cherry flowers is as a sort of indicative of the season and the spring coming.
I think much cooler than a groundhog that we have here in the U.S. So.
So there's actually takes almost a month and a half traveling, cherry blossom from the southern end to the northern end of Japan. And each region declares the spring in different time, depending on the cherry blossom.
And the last question we have is, do you utilize volunteers? I believe we talked
Absolutely.
a little ahead of time, but yeah.
Again, as you all know, the public space and commercial and public garden without volunteers won't survive. And we have a very dedicated, strong core of the volunteers and long-time volunteers. So basically 3 groups. The total, I think as registered, I think we have close to 500 volunteers registered for with our gardens. And one is docent, basically exhibition attendants. So that's one group. And the biggest number is the tour guides. The people like to learn and know and share about the story with the visitors. So the tour guide is probably more than half of this 400 some volunteers. Relatively, and the most probably small group is what we call horticultural support. Basically, that's literally work with gardeners. So it's someone, I don't want to really talk to the people. I just want to, enjoy the garden. And that kind of group of people actually stay with the gardeners. So we have an average 3 times now a week, and half day, 2 hours to half day, and up to probably 7, 8, because again, garden is relatively small. And they come and work with each gardeners. And some of them with us for easily 20 years. So absolutely, the volunteers, I can thank enough for our volunteers.
Well, we cannot thank you enough for this incredible behind the scenes tour. And thank you, Mike. That was wonderful. If you guys have any additional questions, feel free to email them to me at info@pgms.org and we can get you an answer. And I think, Mike, I think we're out of time, but perhaps you and Sada can connect on some of those pruning techniques that Sada had mentioned earlier before we started the webinar. and we can share those with members.
Sounds good.
We could spend an hour on that alone. I mean, there is some great, we could talk about it later, but yeah, there's some great pruning techniques that we discussed very briefly.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much. And everyone, we will see you next week for our stop in Tyler, Texas. It will be a diversity talk with PGMS member Aaron Martinez, followed by a tour of the hospital complex he works for. Your feedback is really, really important. There will be a brief survey emailed to you after this tour. So please just take 2 minutes of your day and fill that out for us. We really, really appreciate it. And we'll see you next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Steph. Thanks, Sada.